Thanks to Cisco for sponsoring our day of podcasting at KubeCon. We had some great conversations. Thanks again to Cisco. You can learn more about Cisco and their microservices platform at mantle.io. That's MANTL.io. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here on a Wednesday afternoon at KubeCon here in Seattle. And here with Michael Ferranti and Priyanka Sharma. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Great.
Doing great.
Great, Priyanka. Michael, tell us a little about who you are and what you do. I know you guys both are in community management. Now, that's the topic I'd really like to discuss today. Community management in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and like connecting with developers and just your experiences with that. So, Priyanka, tell us a little bit about yourself and who you're with.
Sure. So I'm Priyanka, and currently I work on the Open Tracing project. I'm employed by LightStep Inc., which is a startup in the distributed tracing space. My background is more in developer products rather than community management. If I were to, pick a segment, I built my own company before, which is an open source time tracker, and that's where I really got to know the developer community aspect.
Okay.
Because we built it out from zero, bootstrapped, and over 100,000 developers in our community. And because of that, I got in touch with a lot of other cool dev products which are slightly further along, Series A, B, sometimes even larger companies, and I advise and help a lot of them. And so I would say my background is dev products, which inherently includes community management.
Yes, it does, yeah. Michael?
Michael Ferranti, and I'm the VP of Marketing at ClusterHQ. We make tools for developers who are running databases and containers. Previous to ClusterHQ, I spent about 5 years at Rackspace, where, amongst other things, I worked on Rackspace Cloud, the early days of OpenStack, and then most recently a tool called Mailgun, which is an email API for developers. So I've been working with developer products and developer tools for almost 8 years now, and it's great. It's a really fun community. I think, like you said, community management is you can't really think about doing community management for developers well unless you're thinking about product things and how the APIs work and how the CLIs work. It's a different type of community, and it's a very technical role, but it's also really rewarding and really fun.
So how do you guys approach that role in terms of developer, working on developer products, but also thinking about how you approach that differently, especially when there's like their open source projects?
Sure. So I would say one of the biggest differences that I've seen when you're working on a developer product versus others is that in traditional marketing, it's a numbers game. And it's much more about, how many leads lists can you find, what's the mass numbers situation, while in developer marketing, it's a much more personalized approach that works. So you want to create a connection with each developer and make it very personable to them, and that's what wins specifically in the developer space, and that's what excites me to be in it too.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one point to add would just be, so if you haven't done developer marketing before, it can seem really scary, and more kind of traditional, like even if you're a tech marketer, let's say you've spent a decade at HP or some of the business divisions of companies like Microsoft that haven't traditionally focused on developer first. They've been IT shops. Developer marketing can seem scary, but I think one of the things to remember is that like developers are people. And to be good at marketing, you need to understand your audience. And really, developers care about specific things, but once you understand what those things are, and they can be things that aren't traditionally areas that marketers think about. So for instance, documentation. Like if you're doing developer marketing, you need to understand that the way to developers' heart is through documentation, and documentation has tended to be an afterthought for marketing teams. It's like, let's focus on the web page, let's focus on the mobile app, and if we get that right, then people are going to love us. And that's an important part of the overall story. Developers go to web pages just like everybody else. But if the follow-through isn't there, if the documentation's not there, if the CLI command line help isn't there, and I think that's one of the traps that some marketers can fall into working with developer communities, is that they forget about that type of stuff. I mean, that's especially problematic if you're not kind of a developer yourself. But once you understand that, there's kind of a playbook for developers, the way there's a playbook for any product, you can do really, really authentic market, not forget about really important pieces of the puzzle, and connect with those communities.
Yeah, I think a general way people approach marketing is it like a B2B product or a B2C product? And those are two categories, right? Enterprise versus direct to consumer. And both have some pretty different strategies when it comes to marketing. In my experience, a developer product is usually neither exclusively, and it falls in the middle. And the reason for that is that while you are most often, especially if you have a bottoms-up approach, which most products do, while you're most often reaching out to one individual at a time, first, there's way fewer of those. There's over 6 billion people in the world, but there's less than 25 million developers. Stats vary, but there's not that much.
Really just a small group of people.
Exactly. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing is that developers usually are, they have to be highly educated, and also are going to bring in, once their team buys a product, a significant revenue source for the company. So that's why it's kind of in the middle between being direct to consumer versus B2B marketing. And all these strategies that we're discussing now kind of address that, where you have to make a connection with the person and still find a way to scale out with things like docs and all that.
So what's your profile of the Kubernetes developer?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't think I have a great answer for you. It's a pretty diverse group. So first, I think this is a team, or this is a community where kind of developer and operations roles are tending to merge. So with Kubernetes, we're seeing more of infrastructure as code, which means that people are developing software, but they're also operating software. And the reason they're bringing on Kubernetes is to kind of ease the operational burden. So not to be pedantic, but I think that's one part of it, which is that this is a community that cares about operations. And that's different from other developer communities. For instance, just to take an easy example, mobile app developers who don't have to think about the operational aspects. If your operational environment is a calculator app that's running on an iPhone, it's a different set of questions. So that's really fun to work with. I think people are coming at Kubernetes from a couple of different backgrounds. One is kind of from the ops side, the other is from the pure dev side, but they're kind of meeting in the middle, and that's really fun.
Yeah, my experience with the Kubernetes community has happened primarily through the Open Tracing project. What we found very interestingly, that even though Open Tracing is about tracing in the application layer, people in the Kubernetes community are really interested in it. And I think the reason goes back to what you were saying, where this is engineering and operations. So these are people who are able to look at both sides of the spectrum, and so they're realizing, things like full visibility through your microservices is a good thing. In comparison to the other communities I've worked with, many of whom have been mostly web developers, some freelance communities, as well as a lot of API devs through Postman, etc., is that just the expertise level is higher here. That's my experience. A lot of the people I've met, because they got interested in tracing, are engineering leaders in their organizations. They're the ones who are thinking about how to make the system scale, how to keep it running, how to think about performance issues. So the experience level and the skill set is pretty high compared to others.
I would absolutely second that. This is a really, really smart group of people. It keeps you on your toes.
Totally.
You get really, the high level feel-good pitch that you give at a booth and you can get away with at some conferences, you can't get away with here. People really quickly get into the nitty-gritty, which actually makes it lots of fun for, so this is a little bit of an aside, but I think one of the things about community management is kind of how you think about staffing your trade show booth. I mean, this is a trade show like any other trade show, but you can't bring the quote unquote marketing people, and I'm VP of marketing, so I say that with love. Like it's a different audience. So when we come to these types of shows, we love to bring our kernel engineers, and we love to bring our back-end API folks, because they're the ones that really get it. They tend to have the operational knowledge and the empathy that the audience has, and they get a ton out of it. In fact, one of our engineers came out with this for this show. This is his first show, and he is both tired of talking all day long and really excited. More excited he's been about our product in a long time, mainly because like his day-to-day is building the product, and product and marketing are out talking to users, but you get into a rhythm where you're building the product and you lose a little bit of the outside. Here you come to a show here and you get to talk to the user, and kind of the point I'm making there is just that this audience tends to be really technical, and when you think about community management, how you succeed at shows like this, you need to make sure you recognize that and bring the right type of people to have those conversations.
I would 100% second that. So as Open Tracing, we came to this conference, and partly because we were in the CNCF umbrella, and we were interested, like, okay, there's two people here representing Open Tracing. How is this going to work out? Because when you think of staffing events like this, usually it's like teams of marketing members. But what we saw here, we had a small session on a different floor, which usually when you think of conferences, you're like, oh, it's on a different floor, no one's going to go. It was packed, and that's because Ben Sigelman was there, who heads Open Tracing, but Adrian Cole, who heads Zipkin, and also Lyft engineering leads, they were all there to help people and think about these difficult problems. And so people found a way. They somehow managed to not get lost. Some told me they got lost 3 times, but they still made it. That's different from your average conference. This is a community that needs to solve hard problems, and once they know that there's somebody who can help them, they're going to find their way.
Yeah, people are here because they really care. I think that's this conference, DockerCon is like that. I think it's newer projects tend to attract people that are just interested for good reasons. And this is definitely one of those conferences. So people tend to go to the sessions. They're not looking at those as a way to go off and get some time to check on emails and things like that. They really do seek out those great topics.
Even conversations in this area over here, I find very different from the average conference. And what I usually see often is like there'll be lots of people giving out swag, stickers, all that, and all that's still like it's always relevant. But here, time per person has been a lot higher. I've myself spent 10, 15, sometimes even 30 minutes talking to one person because we're having a detailed discussion. We're talking about what's their infrastructure like, are they interested in tracing, have they heard about it? Even if people who've never heard about it, they want to know more, and people invest time, I think, over here to really learn, and you see it even in walking around.
Yeah, I mean, as a marketer, you put a lot of time and effort into the swag, and you want to give something to people that they're going to like. At conferences like this, I find that you have that great 15-20 minute conversation. You forget that like you've got a T-shirt or a pen or something like that. You say, "Would you like a T-shirt?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about like that. I would get a T-shirt by coming to talk to you." Whereas some conferences, it's like, come up, ask the perfunctory question, "Can I get my T-shirt now?" And that's not like it's not like that at this conference.
So that leads me to questions. How do you prepare your marketing for a conference like this? What are some of the things you take into consideration? Like, be it the, how you prepare your employees, how, your engineers, how what swag you bring, what, stickers you bring, the signage. How do you prepare for a show like this?
Well, I can start. So one of the things that I don't try to do is over prepare. So you want to be prepared, but you don't want to come off as unauthentic. So every person at your company should understand what the mission of your company is, what your company does, how you make money. Like those are just the basics that every employee should understand. How each employee expresses those ideas can vary a lot. And I found, especially with engineers, if you try to go too scripted and say like, this like describe the product using these words, it comes off as really unauthentic, and it doesn't give them the room to make a connection with the person they're talking to. Chances are that engineer knows more about not even chances are, that engineer knows a lot more about the product than you as a marketer do. And you should give them the opportunity to connect with the person that they're talking to that wants to understand the product at a different level. Maybe it's the use case that you've just rolled out with a new feature is not the hook that's going to get the person interested that they're speaking to now. What's going to get that person interested is that you're using Clojure, you're using Go, and like that's the hook. That's what creates that personal connection. And once that person kind of trusts that you're a competent technical team, then they're more open to receiving, well, like, okay, that's really awesome that you're using Go. Are you going to be at that conference next week? Yes, I am. Okay, well, let's catch up then. And so like, and so what do? There's like that hook now. And when you try to script it too much, then that you don't let that happen. After that, I would say my one piece of kind of conference swag advice for people would be, if you're going to do conference swag, spend more money on something that people aren't just going to throw away. That's kind of, we put a lot of time and effort into thinking through our t-shirt designs, like making sure that it's something that people are actually going to wear, because you can get inexpensive t-shirts and you can have something to give away, but then people wash their car with them, or worse. So, and the other thing is more and more people come to these are family-oriented events. So some fun things that we've done in the past is we've actually printed t-shirts in children's sizes. Definitely we do men's and women's and unisex, so you have coverage there, but then also it's fun. Some people come to these events and they look for stuff for their kids. And really what you care about is you want to create that personal connection. So if that person doesn't wear your t-shirt but their son does, you're going to make their dad a hero,
bigger
or their
win.
mom a hero with their child, and that creates that personal connection as well. So I would say, all in all, it's looking for opportunities to create personal connections. That gives you an opportunity to talk about your technology.
My perspective on this, coming from the open source project representing at a conference like this, is slightly different. One is that you have lesser resources. So for us, in this case, Ben Sigelman, who co-authored Open Tracing, and I were the two representatives here. And the way we thought about staffing this event and planning for it is that we're not that many in numbers, but we can amplify the message if other thought leaders here also are excited about tracing. So it's about letting people know who are in your community, like Adrian Cole pushing for tracing and the workshops is important, things like that. So being super prepared, like amplifying your message via Twitter by getting allies is really useful. Along the way, for us, every person who is representing open tracing, it's critical that they understand the value proposition and the technical details as much as possible. As we look to having more marketing support, that's something that's critical. As a community and marketing leader, I think every person who is ever talking to anybody needs to understand the product to at least be able to have a 10-minute conversation. And as someone who has a poli-sci degree, I think it's completely doable to get to a point where you're doing tracing yourself.
Political science too.
So, so that's how I would say when you're a project, it's like you're fewer people, but you should amplify more and make sure whoever is there is a thought leader and can have detailed discussions.
How do you then follow up on those personal connections for an event like this? Because from what you guys are telling me, the people who are coming to these events are highly technical. They thoroughly understand the technologies. They thoroughly understand, they understand their work very well. They understand their work. They are part developer, part engineer, part operations people. So if you make that personal connection, then what are your next steps with them? Following up and what are you trying to achieve out of that?
Not a drip email campaign. That's for sure. I mean, I think that the standard marketing tactic around lead generation at events doesn't really work with these types of communities. So you go to some shows and you're walking down the hallway and like someone is gonna lunge out at you and try to scan your badge. Like if they're successful, then that email is going to go right to spam, and you're going to have a worse impression of that company afterwards. So definitely not that. Email has a place, and developers read email, and they look forward to good emails from companies that they value. So it's not that email is not a part of the outreach. It's just like that's not the goal. I think things that we try to do is get people involved with people in the company who aren't in marketing. So for instance, we have a couple of open source projects at ClusterHQ. When we're talking to users and they come back and they say, hey, I'm using the product and I had a question about this, or it happens, I tried this and it didn't work. What we try to do then is say, well, open up an issue on GitHub, because we want to get that person engaged. And our developers are always looking for feedback on the application. Like, they love it when someone puts in an issue on GitHub and is willing to invest time describing the issue, reproducing the issue, and then working to test a solution. So the things like that, where it's not, marketing isn't getting a quote-unquote lead for their list. The company is getting a potential promoter, and we have an opportunity to win that person over. So things like that, getting people to join our IRC channel as a user or our Google user group, submit issues on GitHub, describe how they can become a contributor. Those things, in addition to asking them nicely if they would like to be added to our newsletter, getting that proactive opt-in to make sure that as soon as they don't get it, they're not unsubscribing or just sending it directly to spam. I think those are some of the ways in which you can stay connected with people after the conference is over.
I would say that when you're dealing with deeply technical topics such as tracing, knowledge, disseminating that is the win. So the fact that I have probably talked to 50 people at this conference and that they've learned a little bit more about distributed tracing itself is a win. So very similar to what you say, it's not a lead gen mechanism, but more about making sure people are aware of something. And then from a whole conference, if even one open source contributor takes an interest in the project, that's huge. That could move the project forward so much more. And so these conversations in itself are the goal, is step one. And the second is, for the people you do exchange emails with, you're sure that there's very strong interest to know more. So my personal approach, everybody does it differently, is going to be that once the conference has died down, is to look through all the people I've talked to, have notes about everybody I did, then have a one-on-one reach out. Now, this only works to a certain degree, but as an open source project, I believe this is a better use of my time to reach out to these people. And as long as they get to the point that they know there are docs available and this is where you can reach the community, then it's on the developer. They know when they need this, and they'll be able to reach out to us. And that's my goal over here.
So obviously the end goal, one of the end goals over time is is maybe having them sign up for a commercial distribution of some kind, right? But that can take a while, right? That can take some time to do, and you may not even be ready for that as an organization, right? You may not even be offering a commercial distribution. So how do you fill in the gaps? Because you can't reach everybody, right? I mean, what is it that you're doing, for instance, online, after this conference to kind of fill in those gaps? Like, how do you approach documentation, for example? How do you approach like your blogging strategy? Like, how do you approach all these different things? I mean, that's where you can do a lot of that by yourself, but it takes kind of a more kind of a concerted effort, doesn't it?
So I can answer how we are thinking about, basically content and how it can move the conversation forward, right? Documentation is a great place to start. So the way Open Tracing does it, it's open. So people have a voice in terms of what they want to see and what they don't. Being at a conference like this has been really eye-opening for me, that when someone is already at a high level as an engineer, then what are the knowledge gaps? Are they asking you questions like, hey, is tracing different from monitoring and logging? Or are they asking you questions like, how do I do context propagation, right? And so based on the questions you hear, you know what documentations are more important, and then you improve that.
And that's why your notes have actually a greater value than just the individual notes on the person.
Exactly. And if, let's say, this conference is the type of people you want to attract, then those are the things you write, right? Rather than what you hear at a different conference, which might not be your target as much.
Right.
So that's one big one on documentation. When it comes to content, I think this conference specifically for us has been really useful to know that while not everybody is doing distributed tracing right now, that doesn't mean they don't want to hear case studies. Right. As a project, we have tons of, it's a logo wall. Like, so many big companies are using open tracing, right? But we haven't put out the case studies yet. And now we know it's an important priority.
So you should be coming to the news docket, actually, and sending us contributed articles. I'm serious.
That's awesome. Yeah, good to know.
So a couple things I would add on the content side. So one of the things that's actually hard these days is filling in the matrix of tools that your tool needs to work with in order to provide a complete solution. So as great as storage for containers is, or as great as tracing is, like people aren't, their mission is not to deploy container storage or deploy tracing, it's to build an application, and that means they're using other components. So one of the things that we do, we have this thing that we call the blog matrix, which is basically a spreadsheet with a row along the top and a column down the side. And we just we put in all the tools that we want to work with all the other tools, and we start to use that as a do X with Y matrix. And typically we will, if we have say 5 different use cases, we can kind of mix and match. Use case 1 with tool A and tool B, use case two with tool C and tool D, and we kind of can mix and match so it doesn't get repetitive for the people who are writing it. It gives our developers and our evangelists a chance to learn new tools and to learn how other people in the community are doing things. It gives them more knowledge that they can bring to conversations. It also generates a lot of blog content that is great for SEO. So when people are searching for how to solve these problems on a particular framework or for Kubernetes, or maybe they're using Mesos, then we have kind of we have enough raw material that Google can see, okay, they're looking within this area and this company is an authority there, and they also have this content about this tool or that tool. It tends to actually drive an enormous amount of traffic. We had a concerted effort to do this towards the beginning of last year, and we were able to triple the number of unique blog visitors in, I believe, 4.5 months. And it wasn't free in the sense that it took time, but these articles that we wrote 9 months ago, 12 months ago, are still bringing new people into the site.
That's great.
And having them discover us for the first time.
That's
so
terrific.
It pays back.
Yeah, that's a great strategy with the matrix.
Well, thank you both for taking some time to kind of illuminate kind of this whole idea about developer marketing, and especially kind of in the context of Kubernetes. It's been very helpful for me to better understand kind of what you guys do and a little bit more about the community as well. So thanks for your time, the both of you.
Yes, it was fun.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks to Cisco for sponsoring our day of podcasting at KubeCon. We had some great conversations. Thanks again to Cisco. You can learn more about Cisco and their microservices platform at mantle.io. That's MANTL.io.